Sean, thanks so much for jumping on, man. Yeah, really wanted to get you on. I thought it would be really interesting to, this is the first time we've really talked, but, other than a little bit back and forth on social media and stuff, but I see all the good things you've been doing with SP hockey out there in Chicago. And as a California guy, I'm really able to appreciate the level of hockey in Chicago. And, yeah, I see the testimonials you get and some of the higher end players that you help, advance their game. So yeah, just really wanted to kind of pick your brain, ask you some questions, and maybe talk a little bit of Chicago hockey.
Sounds good. I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, it's been nice to finally kind of connect after a lot of time of back and forth with DMs and emails and stuff like that. So it's a lot of fun to be here, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure, man. Thanks for taking the time. So I guess first to kind of like break a little bit into the conversation, like I mentioned, I'm a California guy. It's pretty evident to me kind of the quality of Chicago hockey. Um, what are your kind of teams like Chicago Mission and stuff? We see them all the time having all kinds of success. What are your kind of general thoughts on the strength of youth hockey in Chicago?
Yeah, it's definitely there's positives and negatives. The quality is definitely very good. Obviously, it speaks for itself with the number of NHL drafted players most years that are out of Illinois, and the number of players playing Division One hockey and major junior, and you could go on and on, really at all levels. And a lot of that, I think, even when I was growing up, the quality was very good, but you see much. The numbers are obviously much higher now, and I think you could attribute a good amount of that to going back 15, 20 years ago, to the start of when the Blackhawks got very good again, and they went through that run of cups and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, prior to that, they were in a really low place, and youth hockey was still very big here. But obviously, when the major league team in your town is very good, it's going to boost interest. It's going to bring new people in, and that brings those numbers up. So we definitely saw some of that have a big impact. Obviously, just population wise, there's a lot of players here, a lot of people, a lot of good coaches. You get a lot of pros who come here over the years, and you see this a lot in the areas where you're at too, where guys played for the Kings maybe, or played for the Panthers or the Lightning, and they settle in those places and they stay there. And then those guys are, those guys or those women are part of kind of building up those youth programs from the grassroots in some cases. So I think it's a combination of a lot of things like that. Obviously, there was always a pretty good stronghold of youth hockey here, and then again, that Blackhawks thing kind of boosted that. And I think you'll start to see maybe a part two of that now with the Bedard being in town and him getting a lot of kids interested, and now that team's starting to show signs of life with some of the younger players coming in, and I think that's important. I lived somewhere else. I lived in Phoenix for 3 years, and I saw, you know, even with the Coyotes struggling, I saw a really strong youth hockey market there, and that obviously all started with that NHL team being there. So I know a lot of people like to rip the team having been there, and there's even talk of bringing it back. But if you've lived there, you kind of understand the impact. Austin Matthews wouldn't exist if the Coyotes hadn't been there. You know what I mean? So the NHL teams being in a market, even if that team might struggle for whatever reason, that's bringing people in the door. Watch 10 years from now how many players are in Salt Lake City. You know what I mean? It's just, and you lived it. You lived in LA, and there was obviously the Gretzky effect and all that. But I mean, youth hockey's blown up there in the last couple decades, and I love it. I love to see that. I know I kind of went off on a tangent, but I think you can use that same example in a lot of metropolitan areas where you have a strong NHL presence or even AHL presence. It's going to bring people interested, and if they're interested, they're going to try to play. And the more people you get like that, the better. And then, obviously speaking strictly to here, I mean, obviously the Mission are very strong, and they have been for a long time. But some other teams have kind of elevated. The Reapers started 3, 4, 5 years ago, and they caught up quick. They're winning state titles. They're getting players moved on to higher levels and things like that. So there's a lot of opportunity and just a lot of good coaches here, and I'd like to see that continue to grow. I do think that like in many places, there are downsides too. We could probably get to that later. I think there's a little bit of oversaturation when it comes to AAA hockey and some things like that, but that could be a whole nother podcast in and of itself.
I definitely want to pick your mind on that too, though.
Yeah, it does have effects that are negative, not just for AAA, but trickling down. But ultimately, yeah, it's a great hockey market. There's a ton of hockey here of all levels, and it's really fun to be a part of that. And I like collaborating with other people like yourself in other regions too, and kind of see what's going on there and what ideas maybe could be brought back and forth and things like that. I'm a huge Sun Belt hockey fan. I love to see those markets do well, and I love seeing kids from those areas getting drafted and going to play college hockey and things like that. And I just think the more people we can have playing this game in this country in different areas, the better. People like to crap on those markets, especially up north. You get a lot of it. I'm sure you've heard it being an LA guy, and I think it's ridiculous. And the game's better when more people are playing it. That's just all it comes down to.
Yeah, 100%. That's super interesting. I wasn't sure because you hit the nail on the head. Like as far as like a lot of former players settling down in LA, another market you mentioned, Arizona, same thing. A lot of guys like to settle there, and I always pump the tires of the Arizona youth hockey circuit. I used to drive out there scouting
Hmm.
when I was scouting for a WHL team, but I would go out to the state championships and things like that. It's sad the timing of that because they were really starting to build up quite a youth hockey circuit in Arizona. I'm sure they still are. Actually, I know they still are. I watched them this season. Uh, but yeah, they were very under the radar. But that's interesting. I didn't realize that Chicago kind of had the same situation with ex players settling down and
A
kind
little
of
bit. There's some ex-Hawks that are throughout some of the programs, and then even outside of that, a couple have settled here. Ben Eager, who's a colleague and friend of mine, actually was partnered up and opened a training center. It's like a studio-sized rink, but there's a gym there, and it's super popular. I do a lot of my ice there. So even people like that who are having impact in a different way, where they built a facility that allows access to ice that even somebody like me might not otherwise get. I'm not going to pay for a full sheet at $400 an hour to have one person out there. But I go to a place like that for a fraction of the cost and still get that training in. And a lot of teams use that ice, and it's just one example of many of, even if you're not coaching a program, there are other people here who are involved in that way. And he does some player development stuff as well, and things. So there's a lot of people like that around. And then even in the summer, you have like Kendall Coyne is around. She does a lot of stuff with the girls programs, even some of the boys, and some things like that. And so you have a lot of different involvement at a lot of different levels of people who have impact like that, who can then give that back to the youth players here. And I think that has a lot of impact in a lot of ways.
yeah, for sure. And it's funny with the recognizable pros and former NHLers. 99.9% of the time those guys just absolutely get it, and a lot of times they're able to run youth hockey clubs themselves, and they just absolutely get it. So it's definitely a good thing. As far as like having that sort of player background, I have a question for you. So I was in Minnesota. Sorry, I was in North Dakota. I confused them. I'm gonna definitely get some shit for that. But
Don't tell them that.
oh my gosh, I know. I'm done. But I was in North Dakota, and it was I was in Fargo, so pretty close to like the border of Minnesota. So I got a real peek into like the Minnesota youth hockey circuit, and there was a guy out there who was pretty interesting. So he's a guy who didn't really play at a high level, and this is something I've always been self conscious of as a
Hmm.
skills coach. Like I always stay away from that. I try to stay in my lane. I received bad coaching growing up, so I don't have like the technical really base for that. So I leave the skills coaching to the skills coaches. However, this guy, who's one of the top guys in Minnesota as far as player development, skill development, he played about the same level as me, like double A, not the greatest player, doesn't have that nice, elite prospects profile a lot of times parents look for, to be honest. But this guy's just absolutely killing it, just one of the best. And it was kind of a trip for me to learn that because I'm like, I've been kind of hard on myself all this time because I didn't really play at the highest level. But what are your kind of thoughts on that? Like, have you seen guys who maybe didn't play at a high level who end up being actually good skills coaches?
I mean, I it's a little self-serving to say, but I mean that's me. I didn't play high level. I played junior B. I bounced around NCAA, D3 for a couple of years. You know, I'm certainly I don't have a fancy EP profile. And even going higher than that, I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, Daryl Belfry, I think, stopped playing competitive hockey at like 15, and
Wow,
he's
I didn't know that.
arguably like the guy in the world. I mean, he's the most well-known, works with all the stars, you know, and he just built that up. It started out, you know, very organic locally, and what he did was working, and word spread, and now he's who he is. And he's got less of a playing career than even I do, you know, and there's a lot of examples of that, you know, where even players might have played a high level like USHL or even a little D1, but they weren't pros, and they're really, really good at what they do now. The name is slipping me right now, but the gentleman that's the head of player development for Montreal. I can't think of his name, but he's great. He had Stride Envy, the company Stride Envy prior. I wish I know his name. I don't know why it's slipping me right now.
Same here. I just saw a clip of him on the ice with Lane Hudson the other day too.
Yeah, that's gonna bug me. I always know who that is, and now I'm on in the spotlight here, and I can't think of it. But regardless, I think he might have played D3, topped out, and same thing. Started just working in development, built up his own company, and got to be really well known. And now he's working for Montreal. So I get that part of being self conscious. I'm kind of at a point now personally where I'm sort of past that. I've worked with a lot of pro players and college players and things like that, and it's gone well, and they've kept coming back. So it kind of told me like, get over it. Like they don't care, so you shouldn't care.
Right.
I definitely wish like just for paper's sake, you had that background. I think it just makes you feel better. But I think people really need to believe in themselves and really just believe in what they're teaching. But really know what you know. You got to really be able to back up what you're doing if you don't have that background, because I feel like you do have to maybe prove yourself a little bit more. Um, but I would definitely tell people don't let that encourage you. You just got to study. I was lucky before I started SB Hockey Development. I actually worked for Prodigy Hockey, which is based here. Brian Kane ran that. He's actually the head of player development now for the Blackhawks. But he kind of started out the same way. He played in USHL. He played Division One. Never played pro. He might have played a little bit in Europe for a little bit and got injured, something like that. But definitely not any kind of illustrious pro career. And just did a lot of studying and started working with a couple guys. And one of those guys ended up being Pat Kane eventually. And he gave him a shot. They were both Buffalo guys, and Pat liked it, and obviously that word spreads and it grows and it grows, and working there and working under him really taught me. I did almost a 180 on a lot of my hockey thinking. Before that, I was a scout. I've been very heavily involved in scouting before I transitioned into player development, and just whole philosophy and how I looked at hockey changed just based on a lot of what I learned there, and I've taken a lot of that with me now, and I always will give credit to that. I just, as far as development and training and how to do things in game and make things that translate and stuff like that. And I was one of those scouts early on that was like, oh, hockey IQ, you have it or you don't. No, that's not true. It's a skill just like shooting. There might be limitations to it for everybody, and some people are capable of acquiring different levels of that, but you could absolutely teach somebody to be smarter at hockey. You can. I do it. Lots of people do it. But I was very much of that mindset as a young scout, like, oh, if you're not smart, you're never going to get smarter. And that it's one of those things I cringe when I look back at now. But I learned, I realized, okay, you can teach people how to like see the game better and read things better. That was probably one of the biggest catalyst to how my thinking changed working there. But back to the original point, you don't have to be former professional hockey player to be a good skills coach. Now you got to be competent and you got to be able to demonstrate what you're doing, and there's something to that. But as far as the knowledge and what to teach and how to teach it, that's just people skills and educating yourself and studying. I mean, I even watch stuff in other sports. Like I've incorporated soccer drills into hockey things. I've seen some stuff in basketball where I'm like, oh, I can make that into like a little game in a hockey practice, like being open-minded to learning other things and not just being in that silo of hockey, cones, this, that, and the other thing, like being open to learning, really watching a game and taking things in. Like if I watch a game and I see a situation, I'm like, oh, I can make like a drill out of that. I can make a game out of that to create that situation and teach that skill. And that pretty much goes across all ages. So I'm always just constantly learning and evolving, and I'm very open about seeing something cool on another coach's Instagram and messaging like, "Hey man, can I use that? This is awesome. I'll give you full credit for it." Like taking the ego out of it, and I'm much more about collaboration versus competition. Even locally, a lot of us are very friendly and we respect each other, and you know, a lot of players work with all of us. I think that's the one thing in the Chicago area here. Very few of us have like exclusivity to players. Like a lot of players will work with different skills coaches because we're all kind of doing something different. And I encourage that as long as it's somebody who I know does a good job, in my opinion, and I respect, I'll be like, yeah, go do some stuff with them. Like they're probably doing something different than I am. And I know I'm going to do something different than they do. And there's thousands of players here. There's plenty to go around. So I think just having that little bit of collaboration bit is kind of a cool thing too. So it's just about being open minded, being willing to learn, and just being confident. Because these players, especially the higher level ones, they'll see right through you if you are nervous or you're doing stuff that's not going to benefit them. They're going to know it. So it's fully possible. There's plenty of examples of not having an illustrious background in playing, but also being able to at the same time be good at this. It's 100% possible. You just have to believe in yourself. You got to study, you got to learn, you got to be a sponge, and you have to really be able to sell that. And I don't mean sell that like you don't know what you're doing and act like it, but you just got to be confident and conduct yourself appropriately, and they'll keep coming back. You got to put that out there.
I'm glad you answered one of my questions I was going to ask you. Of course, the low hanging fruit is, can hockey IQ be taught? So I'm glad you kind of
Yes, it
gave me
can.
your, yeah.
And
That's
I say that again as somebody who, 10 years ago maybe was very much in scouting reports, would write bad decision making, blah, blah, blah. And I would use that as like, okay, they're just never going to get better at that. And I understand the mentality of thinking that, but you got to get over the fact that that part of the game, that is a skill too. And that can be taught, that can be improved. There's limits to that, just like there's limits to how fast you can skate, how hard you can shoot, all those things. It's no different than that. But it can be taught, it can be improved, and that can happen through proper training on ice, as far as creating situations where you have to make decisions and come up with solutions. I'm not real big on, I don't do the obstacle courses. That's just not my thing. I don't have all the apparatus out there and you're skating through all these things. I'll incorporate little bits of those things like for warm-ups and stuff like that. And I'm not disparaging that. That's just not my style. I I like to create situations where players are doing things against each other, where they have to compete. They're going against a person who's actively trying to take that puck away or take their space away. And now you've got to come up with a solution as to how you're going to beat that. Um, that's not to say we don't do individual skill stuff. We do, but as far as an overall philosophy and teaching IQ, like that's how you can make somebody smarter. You could create situations for them on the ice where they have to learn how to have their head up and make reads and make decisions in certain time in certain situations. And then, the other flip side to that is a lot of the video work I do in breaking down game footage. And, for me doing that, it's not even just about me talking at them for 45 minutes. I'm doing the same thing I do on the ice. I'll play a clip through and I'll be like, all right, what do you see here now? You tell me what you're looking at. What could be different? What are our other options here? And you get them to walk through those solutions themselves. And I'm pretty sure there's science behind brain retention when you're the one having to do it. It's kind of like when you're learning a new skill, whether it's baking or suturing as a medical student or whatever, you're going to be a lot better at it when you're doing it and learning from doing it than just standing back and watching somebody or having them explain it to you. I think that's the easiest way to relate that. So, long story short, there are many ways to teach somebody to be a smarter player. I think the people who are against that don't think about the fact that there's levels to that like any other skill. There's limitations.
Mhm.
Just like again, you're only going to skate so fast. You're only going to shoot so hard. There's Connor McDavid, and then there's the rest of us. You know what I mean? Like we're not all going to be that. We're not all going to be Gretzky brain wise, but it doesn't mean you can't get better and be taught to be better than where you are now. And I think people got to get past that extreme.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Sean, 1 second. I'm gonna have to do a cut here. 1 second. I'm
Okay.
getting murdered by the sun. I gotta figure
Okay.
something. Okay, I think that's better. That was funny. Good old California sun.
Hey, at least you have it.
Yeah. So that was that was kind of a segue into something else I wanted to ask you too. Working with higher level players, and of course, you being in Chicago, I'm sure you've been to some Blackhawks games. Um, has there ever been any moments where you got a glimpse of that gap of what it takes to be an NHL player, like the talent level of NHL players? I know we had there was a guy who I believe was also a Blackhawk as well as an LA King, Eric Belanger, who
Hmm.
he was out here. He was at the local rink in Pasadena. It's a small rink. This guy was like a third or fourth line NHL center, not a top six, not a big scorer, but this guy was standing at the red line of a smaller rink and just at will flicking pucks off the crossbar, like
Yep.
just showing just how good his hands are, how accurate his shots are. And
Yep.
that was the moment for me. I'm like, oh shit, there is a
Yep.
big like gap between what it takes to even be a bottom six NHL forward.
It's one of my favorite subjects. It's funny you went there. Like I tell people all the time that not even the average person, I think even some people who are in hockey, that might be coaching or whatever, have no concept of how good the press box NHL player is.
Yeah.
Like that guy would walk onto any rink in the world and be the best player there. Like you know, even going back to a different era, like, I'd go watch before the Blackhawks had all their arenas and stuff, their practice facilities downtown. They used to have a rink out in the suburbs, and yeah, I'd go watch practice sometimes. And even watching a guy like Probert,
Mhm.
like, and granted, Probert had some good offensive years in the '80s, so it's
Yeah.
not really to disparage him. But I mean, he's not the first guy you think of as being, oh man, that guy would be so like, even a guy like that. When you're up close and you see what they do, and heck, even like a John Scott, like who probably didn't really even necessarily belong in the modern NHL toward the end of his career, but like you really see him going and zipping around. Like that guy can move, that guy can stick handle a little bit, that guy can
Sure.
do some things. Now it might not be great relative to his peers, but he'll go drop into any like elite leagues, beer league game and probably skate circles around a lot of the people. You know what I mean? Like so the gap even from the AHL to the NHL is huge. And those guys are great. I mean, they're better than 99.9% of the playing population in the world. But even that, if you go to I go to a Wolves game here, the AHL, and then if you went right from that to a Blackhawks game the next day, you'd be like, man, like as good as those guys are, there's still that gap.
Yeah.
And that gap really is, you could talk about all the skills. It's just, there's no time. Like the how quick your brain has to work to be in an NHL hockey game is like it's mind-boggling. And if you ever get the privilege of like sitting low enough, even at like a 100 level of an NHL game where you're at least close to that ice level, and you really see just how little time and little space these guys have to make decisions and make plays, and the fact that they still do, it's mind-boggling. And that's the biggest difference. That's why there are players in the world right now. who are more skilled than players that are currently in the NHL. Guys who might skate faster in a all-star competition, they might hit more targets, they might shoot harder. They're better skilled than guys that are there now, but they don't think the game fast enough, so they can't process, they can't use those skills because they can't do it at that level at that speed. And there's that, and there's players who maybe can't change their game, because they could be an offensive dynamo and score 60 goals in the AHL, but maybe they're just not that player in the NHL for whatever reason. Can they adapt and be something different? A lot of times they can't. They can't become a third line, fourth line defensive forward. The best example I always use of that is Dave Bolland, back in the Hawks heyday. He was I think he was a 50, 60 goal scorer his last year in the OHL. Granted he was an overager, but still, I mean, he put up a lot of points. He was never going to be that in the NHL, and he knew that. What did he do? He became the rat. He was the first rat before Marchand. Like he was like that lockdown third line center who was a pain in the butt to play against, but would still pot you like 15 goals. He would set up some stuff, but he evolved his game to just be, I'm going to be a lockdown defensive center. You're going to have me out there at the end of the game taking a face off. You're going to have me and my line playing against the first line. Like, and you evolve your game and change and change what you can be. And a lot of players can't because they've been so used to being what they are. They're not able to change to adapt to play in the highest league. So it's a combination of a lot of things, mental and physical. But yeah, I mean that people just have no concept of how good those players are. It's, you know, I thought I did before, and then even just being on the ice and working with some of them, it's like, man, oh man, like I joke around with people. You show me one guy, let me watch him take like 5 shots, kind of to your original point. I'll tell you if that guy played in the NHL or not,
Hmm.
just by how he shoots the puck. Like they just do something different than the rest of us do, and you hit it the nail on the head. Like this guy's flicking BBs from the red line without even like
Hmm.
breathing. Like they have a different skill set than the rest of us do, and it's very evident when they're around us mortals. So, um, but yeah, people want to call a guy a bum, blah blah blah. Like I get it, you're talking relative to their peers in the league, but like that bum is the best hockey player you've ever been around in your life. Like it's silly how good they are, and especially nowadays. I think that's even more. Just it's the base level, like foundation baseline skill level of a player today, even as kids, is so far ahead of where it was when I was a kid. And that's getting to be a little bit of time now, but still, it wasn't that long ago. It wasn't the 50s. So I actually recently, my midget team. Funny enough, we played at nationals in Anaheim when I was my second year of midget. We actually won a national championship, and I one of our teammates put all those videos up on YouTube because we had all the games were like on VHS, which kids out there, that's a cassette tape. You put it in a machine, it plays the video. You don't know what that is. Um, and I was watching it, and we were really good, right? I mean, we won a national championship. A lot of us went on to play junior hockey and stuff. And I was watching it, and I was like, my gosh, like this is just not like watching a midget game now. It's like players now are just they're so much better. They're so much quicker. They skate better. Like obviously technology plays a little hand in some of that, but like players just the training and everything they do now is so much better. And when you get to that highest level, I mean the bottom of the rung, if you will, to be that good is really ridiculously high. And you can make some arguments about the mental side of it and actually making decisions and stuff. I think you're starting to see that with some younger players who have been doing a lot of training with cones and not being forced to actually like make decisions, and they get into games and they have all this skill and they can't get around anybody or do anything. I think there's that side of it too, but nobody can argue the level that players are at now physically and skill wise is just the average player would be a superstar 25 years ago if you transported them back. And that's not to take away from those players. That was my era. I was a 90s hockey kid. But you watch a game then and now even, and it's like, wow, just the speed, the quickness, and the pace that everything happens. It's just I don't know how they do anything out there. I really don't.
So from obviously you're a guy who's pretty ingrained in the actual skill development component of building these hockey players. How how important this might be a biased answer, which is fine, but how important would you say that the skill development component of a player reaching their potential? How big of a piece do you think that plays?
Huge. And I think it's why you see NHL teams investing so heavily in that department now. Everything used to be all about scouting, and scouting is still really important. But you can get a player in the door in your organization if you don't do anything with them. A lot of players aren't just going to naturally get better. Some will. Some are just going to be great right out of the gate. But that's like
Yeah,
1% of
yeah,
anybody that's
very
ever
small
drafted.
minority.
Not a lot of 18-year-olds walking right into the league. It happens every year but there's a handful of them versus the guys who are 24, 23, 25, even finally getting their first crack to be regulars. And so I think it's an area that was probably neglected for a long time because just people didn't put as much into it. It's just like we're going to scout them, we'll get them in here. They're going to do our stuff, and they're going to practice. They'll get better, and sometimes that'll work. But you know, it's teams now. I mean, they've got their guys who are not only working with the current pro players, whether it be the minor leaguers or the NHL guys, but you got them. They're traveling to the cities of their prospects and they're renting ice and working with them on the side. They're doing video with them. They're doing all these things to be working with them while they're in junior or college before they even become pros. You didn't see that kind of investment before. Teams would have their prospect camp in the summer for a week. They would do that. But I mean, it's like a year-round thing where these player development departments are like locked into these players and they're reporting back to the NHL club. Here's what he's doing. Here's what he's not doing. We're kind of working on this, et cetera, et cetera. And you're really seeing those departments on those teams are growing. Teams are recognizing how much work there is to do all that. Um, so really, I mean, you could take if you it doesn't work on everybody. Some players are what they are, but you draft somebody or you sign them as a free agent or whatever, you get the right people and they're working with them, they will make them better. They will invest and they'll identify what they need to get better at. They'll work on those things. They'll enhance the stuff that's already good and make that better. Like that investment to not make it is silly. I think the evidence at this point is so overwhelming that there's a major impact you could have on a player getting better. And like anything, there's limitations to that. But there's no way around it, and you're seeing that now. Teams are investing way more. Even college programs they have people who are like dedicated to doing like one-on-one video with their players and stuff.
Right.
And I know that because I'm trying to reach out and do some of that myself, and I'm hearing a lot more than I used to. Oh, our team actually meets with us, like our D coach meets with us like once a week to do one-on-one work, and I'm like, great.
Yeah.
As a business owner, I'm like, crap, but I'm like, as a hockey person who cares about these players, I'm like, good for you. Like, I'm glad they're doing that for you. You don't have to seek it out elsewhere. So I think you're really starting to see from the top down, a lot of junior programs have like a dedicated player development coach now, whether it's somebody who's local or not. Maybe a colleague of mine lives in the Chicago area here, but he drives up to he works for a USHL team. He'll go up there like a couple times a month to do stuff, and then he does video and things. So you're seeing that trickle down to even I say the lowest levels, but like the junior levels even. And it's for a reason because when it's done right, people make people better. And you just have to find the right people who are doing a good job of that. And that's why you're seeing that investment like all over the place.
There's a there's a pretty heavy misconception out there. I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on, and that is where the skill development is done. A lot of people are under the impression that most of the skill development is done in games when it's really in practice or with coaches like yourself. Um, and for me, I had like kind of an eye-opening moment recently. I was watching a kid who played Bantam AAA last season in California. played against the Junior Ducks, Junior Kings, those premier teams, but he was on one of the lesser teams, right? One of the teams that wasn't on that same level. Very good player. And now I saw him, now he's playing midget and still a great player, but I noticed that there was a little bit of trouble adjusting, maybe a little growing pains, getting used to the speed of the game, really, and almost just sensing pressure was off and just a step behind time wise. And that's usually like a telltale sign of a player kind of adjusting to a new level, right? We see it with the AHL guys jumping up in the NHL. It's
Hmm.
the timing and it's the speed. So one can say, well, he was playing in a good league. He's playing AAA against Junior Kings, Junior Ducks. But I'm like, hold on, who's he practicing against? He's not
Right.
practicing against those guys. So for me, like that's something I always, USA Hockey. That's kind of what they tell us is like most of the skill development's done in practice, not games, despite what the parents think or what hockey fans think. But for me, that was like very very like that's a very good example. So I'm sure that happens across the board, but that was the first real like stark one I've seen. But yeah, what are your kind of thoughts on that?
I 100% agree. You so much is happening in a game, and you're on the ice so little time, and then you touch the puck even less of that time. I think I saw uh, the statistic. I think on average, a player has the puck for like 6% of a game, or
Right.
6% of the time they're on the ice. Like if you take the total time on the ice and the total time of like holding a puck, it's like less than 10%. And on top of that, with being 20 players on a bench and all these things going on, like you're getting coach feedback, but how extended is that? Because they got to pay attention to lines. They're watching what's happening.
Sure.
It might take 10 or 15 seconds to pull you aside and draw something on the board. Maybe that happens once a game. And that's not crapping on coaches. That's the reality of a game. You don't have a lot of
Right.
time for that. So yeah, you're learning, your habits are getting better, your things are getting better through practice reps, through playing against other people over and over and over again, doing those things over and over and over again. You don't get that in a game. The ice and the touches just aren't there. So I 100% agree with that. That might be across all sports, quite honestly. Like your practice time is where you're getting better. Your off season doing things, whatever that is where you're getting better, where you could focus on reps and working on certain things and not just being at a game. That's why these kids now, I mean, there's so many like, it's unbelievable how many summer like tournaments and showcases and things there are now. And I'm not against playing games in the summer. Have fun. Like it's about having fun, right?
Mhm.
But I think parents and I say parents because they're the ones really making that decision a lot. They prioritize like games year round way more
Right.
than they probably should. And again, I'm not telling you what to do. It's your money, it's your time. They have fun doing it, great. I'm not saying not to do that stuff at all, but you know, the development and the improvement happens in those practice reps, whether it's at practice with your team or if you're doing outside small groups with someone like me or doing camps with somebody else or whatever, that is where that improvement happens. And I think you make a good point in the case of your player that you're talking about where there is something to be said for playing games against those teams. Like that will help you some. Like you're going to adjust to who you're playing against. But it's who are you playing against 3 or 4 days a week?
Right.
That you might be a really, really good player on that team, but then if you're like kind of that better player on that lesser team, how much are you being pushed to improve outside of just that 20 minutes of ice time you get maybe in the game against those better teams. Again, I'm not discrediting you will get better playing against better teams in games. It'll happen, but I think it's more incremental versus what it's like being in practice with players like that. So I think your point kind of made itself, and I agree.
So it's almost to the point where I mean, is it even like is it a stretch to for obviously parents and kids who are like weighing their options, where they're going to go, and obviously they want to develop their skills. They value that. I mean, is it a stretch to to kind of have the stance like, it's almost the quality of team is probably more important than the prestige of the league? I mean, would that be like kind of a fair kind of thing to say?
I think so. I think so. I think that comes down to that might be part and parcel too with like coaching. Like, what's the coaching like? How
Sure.
do you how you know how what's their track record for players developing and moving up to the next team or the next level or whatever the case may be? There's definitely homework to be done there, and it's a slippery slope, right? Because I think when you're talking about kids, I think this is more relevant. Um, you know, you take that to the pro level. But I guess it's the same principle. I'm kind of going off here, but like my thought was like you obviously if you're somebody who's like a bubble NHL guy, a lot of times the deference is well let them go down. They're going to play lots of games. Let them get those minutes.
Hmm.
So you could make the same argument. Well, is it better for them to be up practicing with the NHL guys every day? And even if they're not getting into the games, is that better than them getting in the games at the pro level, a level lower? I don't know. When you get to that level, I feel like there's maybe some debate there, and maybe that creates a debate for the entire subject. I don't know, but I feel like for kids, youth players, I definitely think there's more to that. When you start getting to the pro level, I think there's a healthy debate of is it more worth a guy moving up, even if they're not totally ready, but now they're going to be practicing with the team every day. They're going to be playing against those guys every day. Will that make them better suited to get into an NHL game versus playing AHL games? I think, I feel like there's arguments for both there. So I trapped myself a little bit on that, but I think it's different when you're talking about grown men professionals than youth players that are still growing physically, growing mentally,
Yeah.
developing, and all that. So I think it's a complicated subject and it's a good question, but I feel like even with the nuance, I would lean that way for the youth players for sure.
Yeah, that makes sense because that you kind of reminded me of another situation where there's a very highly regarded LA Kings prospect, Liam Greentree, who
Hmm.
has done it all in the OHL, and it was kind of his training camp was kind of, well, is he going back or is he going to stick around? And I am of the belief it would serve him better to stick with the NHL club, practice against NHL caliber talent, than to go back to the OHL and kind of continue to just really run.
Right.
So
Because at that point, like, what are they? They're not going to get any better doing that. Like, they're not
right,
being challenged anymore. That's where that, and I feel like that with the new rule, there's going to be a new, and they changed the rule, or it's going to change, where those players could play in the AHL soon. I feel like I that was all part of this whole CHL NCAA thing was that
right,
that was going to become part of that, or there was talks about it because there's so many of those players that maybe they don't belong with the NHL team yet, but they should be playing pro. They should be in the AHL, but they're not allowed to do that because of the CHL rule. They have to stay, and it's like, well, what? I get the teams want them back to sell the tickets and win a Memorial Cup and do all that, but like, is that doing that player any good to be 20, 19, 20, and tearing it up and having 150 points when clearly that's just not a challenge for them anymore? Is that like a wasted year of development? I think you can make that argument.
I believe that. I don't understand it, but
Yeah.
a lot of NHL GMs who get paid the big bucks. I guess they do. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm confused by it.
Sometimes, maybe.
I know, right? Um, well, okay. So I don't want to take up
No,
too
you're
much more
good.
of your time, but I definitely had kind of a final question, I guess, for you. So, as I mentioned, you've been in the game for a minute. You've had big impacts on a lot of players getting better out there. Um, so you'd obviously be a good guy to ask, but what would you say is like what's the most rewarding part of it for you?
There's a lot. That's a good question. Obviously, just players moving up and achieving what they're after and having, a small impact on helping that happen. I think there was one moment this year. I thought about it when you asked that. I had a small group of like four players. Especially in season, a lot of the groups were smaller with game schedules, kids are in school, all that. I don't have as big of groups as I do like in the spring and summer as often anyway. But all four kids, I looked at them and they've all kind of known each other or skated together at some point. And every single one of them moved up to another level from where they were last year. And I said, man, every one of you guys bumped up. One went from like playing high school to AAA. One went from a couple went from playing like JV to varsity at their programs, and then another, I think another actually had just they hadn't left for junior yet, but they got signed and they went from AAA to play in the NAL. And I was like, man, like that's cool. Like every one of you guys, like we did the work this summer. You did all the work you had to do everywhere you had to do it, and you succeeded. At least in getting there. Now, once you're there, you got to stay there and you got to succeed there, and that's the next level. But just seeing players move on and get see the excitement when they make a team they wanted to make, or move up a level they wanted to move up, and there's that part of it. I've had a lot of that the last couple of years with players moving up to junior and college and stuff like that. And that part's cool. But I think one of the coolest things for me, especially with my older players that come back every summer, whether they're local and it's the off season or they come back from wherever they were playing junior or college or whatever, a lot of them have been training together like 2 or 3 years now. And like seeing the smiles when they get back out for the first time together and like they chit chat and comment, they pick up like right where they left off from August, and now it's June, or like May or whatever the case may be. But seeing like the camaraderie in training together and skating together and being in the locker room together, and then those guys just like smile and they pick up and see some stick taps on the helmets and things like that, like goofing around, and that they compete hard and they go at it, but that's kind of why they have that relationship. And I think for me, that's one of the cooler things is seeing the friendships that have formed out of being in my sessions together. And I see guys pumping each other up on Instagram. They'll share each other's stories if they had a highlight or whatever. And you've been in hockey your whole life. I have. I still am in touch with guys I played with as a bantam or a midget. Um, and especially now with social media, it's even easier for these guys to stay in touch with each other. And you're part of forming these like lifelong friendships for these players. And these guys will probably be friends in 10 years when their careers are over in some form. And I think for me, having a hand in like building those relationships for them and seeing them kind of grow up and see what they become is really, really cool. I've got a couple players that are probably, you know, non-pro guys who are getting done. They're finishing college, or they did the junior thing and they're like, I just kind of want to get done and get on with school. Maybe I'll play club or intramurals or whatever. And now it's like, okay, well, you've done this with me for 3 years. How about you come learn it a little bit more and work here? Start growing this out. Have some of you guys give back, and you lived this for 3 years. Now you can do it. You can be that guy that somebody looks up to and remembers as part of their journey. And so just the evolution of all that is a lot of fun and rewarding. And just people entrusting you with their time, with their kids, with their money, all that stuff. I don't take that lightly, and I never take that for granted. So I always just work as hard as I can and do right by them as much as I can and be an advocate. And you know, it's very, very cool. I never imagined I'd be here, and I still feel like I have more to do and more to grow. But I figured this would just be a little side gig. I'd have a couple clients, and that was it. And it really snowballed into more than that. And I'm very fortunate. It's a really competitive space, and there's a lot of people trying to do what I'm doing. And I'm very grateful for everybody who's come along the ride and had a hand in that starting out. And I just like to maintain those relationships. And I'm long after they're done with me, I'm still invested in how they are and what they're doing as human beings. And I think for me, that's all that's just picking one thing's hard. It's a big hodgepodge of this is very rewarding. It's very cool. I want to keep doing that and getting better at it myself.
Awesome, man. Well, this was great. Thanks so much for jumping on and sharing all of your insights. And obviously, you're doing great work out there. So please keep it up with SP Hockey Development. And yeah, man, thanks so much for jumping on.
No, I appreciate you having me. It was a lot of fun. And I'll be watching the next one, whoever you got on. Keep up the good work with this. It's a lot of fun.